Have you ever wondered if America's biggest stake isn't a battleship, but a piece of paper? That the real power is making sure everyone in the world has to use your special token, the US dollar, before they can buy the one thing everyone needs: oil. Let me ask you a tougher question. Imagine the dollar's power was never just about trust. Imagine it was a giant kingdom built on a simple rule: all oil trade routes must pass through our castle. What happens when the countries locked outside the gates start digging their own tunnels? And what if a powerful neighbor, China, starts handing them shovels? If China and Iran are already using these tunnels to trade oil, does it mean the castle will fall tomorrow? Or does it mean something slower and maybe more dangerous? A quiet rotting of the foundations that everyone ignores until the walls start to crack. Stay with me, because this story isn't what you think. First, I'm going to show you how this dollar for oil kingdom, the petrodollar system, was built and why it gave America a superpower no one else had. Second, we'll walk through how being kicked out of the kingdom forced countries like Iran and Russia to find a backdoor and why China was waiting there to open it. And third, I'll show you why this isn't a story about a sudden explosion, but about a slow tide that is pulling the beach out from under the castle. And if seeing the world this way, looking at the hidden machinery instead of the noisy headlines, is valuable to you, do me a favor. Click like and subscribe. Share this with anyone who still thinks this is just boring economics. It's not. It's about the real rules of power. Now let's get to the heart of it. The story of the petrodollar is simple. Think of the world as a giant farmer's market. After the 1970s, America made a deal. If you wanted to buy the most important food at the market, oil, you first had to go to America's store and buy their tokens, US dollars. Soon, everyone who sold oil wanted these tokens, and everyone who needed oil had to get them. This gave America something economists call an exorbitant privilege. It's like being the owner of the only casino in town. Everyone has to use your chips, and if you ever need more money, you can just print more chips for yourself. The countries selling oil ended up with mountains of these dollar chips and had to put them somewhere, so they lent them back to America, basically paying for America to run its household. According to the IMF, the dollar is still the biggest chip at the table, making up well over half of all the chips held by countries around the world. So no, the dollar is not dead, it's still the king, but it's a king who now hears whispers in his own court. And that changes the question. The question isn't, is the king still on the throne? He is. The real question is, how many people in the kingdom are now secretly building their own boats to leave? That is a much more frightening question for the king. This is where the story gets very practical. Let's talk about being kicked out. For countries like Iran and Russia, the dollar system isn't a marketplace. It's a cage. America has the key. With sanctions, the US can lock anyone out of the global banking system, turning off their financial water supply. It's an incredible weapon, but using it has taught a very clear lesson to those on the receiving end. If your life depends on a system someone else controls, you are not free. You are a dependent. That is why Iran and Russia started looking for an escape. Not for fun, but for survival. They had no choice. After being sanctioned, Russia rerouted its oil sales to the east. Today, a huge amount of the trade between Russia and China is now done in China's currency, the yuan. They're not just taking a detour, they're building a whole new road where the dollar is not the toll collector. Iran's story is even more stark. To survive, it sells its oil to China. Recent data shows that China is by far the biggest buyer of Iranian oil, creating a lifeline that completely bypasses the American system. These aren't just small back alley deals, this is a real working alternative. It proves the king's rules are no longer the only rules in town. And here is where China becomes more than just a helping hand. China is not running a charity. Anyone who thinks so is blind to how the world really works. By helping Iran, China gets three things. It gets the oil it needs to power its country, often at a discount. It gets a friend in a tough neighborhood, and it gets to practice using its own currency, the yuan, for big, important deals. This last part is the master plan. China doesn't need to defeat the dollar tomorrow. It just needs to make its own currency useful enough, normal enough, that other countries start seeing it as an option. Beijing's goal is not to storm the castle and slay the king, it's to build a new, smaller, but very successful town next door. That's why China built its own payment system called CIPS. Think of the main global system, SWIFT, as the world's financial superhighway. CIPS is a smaller, private highway China built for itself and its friends. It's nowhere near as big as SWIFT, but its traffic is growing fast, especially with countries like Russia that have been kicked off the main road. It's a parallel universe being built piece by piece. If this is making sense to you, hit that like button and share this video, because too many people think the world is either black or white, that the dollar is forever or it's collapsing next week. Both are children's stories. The truth is in the middle. Now let's zoom out. China and Iran are not alone. This is part of a bigger shift among a club of nations called BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now with new members like Saudi Arabia and Iran. This club now represents almost half the world's people. For years, they've talked about trading more among themselves, using their own money. The sanctions on Russia were like throwing gasoline on that fire. Now we see them doing it. India has paid for Russian oil in yuan. China and Brazil are settling trades in their own currencies. They are not trying to build a new empire overnight. It's more like a neighborhood co-op. They're tired of the rules and fees of the big landlord, so they're starting to trade with each other directly. This is not a revolution, it's an adaptation. It's not about burning down the landlord's mansion, it's about everyone building their own homes so they don't have to live under his roof. And this is where Saudi Arabia comes in, the landlord's oldest and most trusted tenant. The kingdom has not left the dollar, but recently the Saudi finance minister said they are open to trading in other currencies. That statement by itself is a tremor. Imagine the captain of the King's Guard saying, "I'm open to the idea of guarding other people too." He hasn't left his post, but just by saying it, he changes the feeling in the entire castle. The old rules are no longer written in stone. So where does this leave us? The truth is this: the American dollar is still king of the mountain. Its financial markets are the biggest and most trusted. But China and Iran are showing how to build paths around that mountain. The BRICS nations are setting up their own marketplaces in the valley below. Data shows the dollar's share of the world's savings, while still dominant, is slowly shrinking. This is not a collapse, it's an erosion. And here is the ruthless lesson. If you are comfortable because the king is still on his throne, you might be right about the fact, but you are asleep to the danger. The real risk isn't a sudden war that topples the kingdom. The real risk is the slow, quiet decay. Is the kingdom becoming less important? One back road, one side deal, one new marketplace at a time. By the time it's obvious that the king's power has faded, it will have already been gone for years. That is how great powers fade. Not with a bang, but with a slow loss of relevance, one workaround at a time. So let me bring it all home. How are China and Iran trying to topple the US dollar? Not with an army, they are doing it the slow, cold, serious way. They are trading oil in their own currencies. They are using America's own weapons, sanctions, as the reason to build a world that is immune to them. They are creating new financial highways where they get to set the rules. This does not mean the dollar is finished. It means the monopoly is over. And the difference between those two is something only fools ignore until it's too late.